You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you. Chapter 87. Autumnal sounds combine with sad remembrances to inspire a composition on the Qin. And a flood of passion allows evil spirits to disturb the serenity of Zen. The serving woman was shown into the Naiad's house. After paying her respects, she delivered a letter for Daiyu, and was taken off to drink tea with the maids. Daiyu opened her letter. It was from Bao Chai and began. Dear cousin. Some malign star must surely have ruled the day of my birth. Misfortune pursues the family at every turn. Cousin Qin and I both fatherless, mother advanced in years, to which add the sounds of bestial ululation that now emanate from our inner apartments at every hour of the day and night. And, to complete this recital of family woes, Brother Pan's recent and most cruel blow. Alas! We are indeed beset with howling winds and torrential rains. As I lie awake at night, tossing on my bed, unable to master this grief, my only consolation is the thought of a kindred spirit such as yours. Ah, dear cousin! You, I know, have the heart to share my present trials, as once you shared the joys of that golden autumn, when harmony and conviviality prevailed. Then, united beneath the aegis of the Crab Flower Club, we tasted crustacean delicacies, and contemplated chrysanthemums. Once, I recall, you questioned the flowers thus. Who, world disdainer, shares your hiding place? Of all the flowers, why do yours bloom so late? The lines never fail to rive my heart. For are not you and I late blooms, that tremble at the approaching chill? I have endeavored to compose a lament in 4 stanzas, to express these feelings of mine. I beg you, read it not as a piece of literary art, but as a simple vessel for my tears. Your affectionate cousin, Bao Chai. The poem was attached. Alas! The seasons turn, and turning bring once more the chill of autumn. To our joy-forsaken door, we have a flower. Floss Matries is its name. Heartsease. Poor mother. What art can heal thy grief, or ease thy heart? My soul aches for thee. The scudding clouds by biting autumn winds are blown. The courtyard walk with withered leaves is thickly strewn. Whither shall I go? To whom shall I turn? My love is gone, and only an anguish too deep for words remains. My heart is desolate. The mighty sturgeon has his pool. The stork upon the dam makes his habitation. Fish in scaly armor, birds in serried plumes, find protection. In my distress, I question that inscrutable expanse. O bowels of earth! O boundless sky! Will ye not hearken to my cry? Above, the twinkling Milky Way. The air cold. Slanting moonlight. The water clock. Sunk past midnight. My restless heart grieves still. I read once more this sad lament, before entrusting it to you, my kindred soul and friend. Daiyu was deeply moved. She knew I'd be able to understand, she thought to herself. That's why she wrote to me rather than anyone else. She was lost in thought, when a voice called from outside. Is Cousin Lin at home? Refolding the letter, she replied in a somewhat distant tone. Who's that? Her visitors were already on their way into the room, Tan Chun, Shi Xiang Yun, and the 2 Li sisters. The girls exchanged greetings, and Snow Goose served them with tea. During the conversation that followed, Daiyu found her thoughts turning back to the gathering, 2 years earlier, at which they had written the chrysanthemum poems. Don't you think it's strange, she remarked to the others. Since Cousin Chai moved out of the garden, she's only been to see us a couple of times altogether. And now it seems as though nothing will induce her to come. I'm beginning to wonder if she'll ever visit us again. Tan Chun smiled. Of course she will. It's just that at the moment things are a bit difficult. Cousin Pan's wife is rather a tricky sort of person. Aunt Shue's getting on in years, and with this latest trouble of Pan's on top of everything else, Chai really is needed to look after things at home. It's not like the old days, when she was free to do as she pleased. As she spoke, they heard a sudden gust of wind outside, and a patter of falling leaves against the paper-covered window. A faint scent drifted into the room. They all tried to guess what flower it could be coming from. It's very like cassia blossom, suggested Dayu. Tan Chun laughed. Still a southerner at heart. It's the 9th month, long past cassia time. Dayu smiled. You're right. But then I didn't say it was, only very like. Anyway, Tan, Xiangyun butted in, you can't talk. Don't you know the lines? The lotus fragrance drifts for miles. The cassia blooms till autumn's end? In the south, the late flowering cassia is at its best now. It's just that you've never seen it. If you ever have a chance to go to the south, you'll be able to see it for yourself. And what should I be doing in the south? Retorted Tan Chun with a crushing smile. Anyway, I knew all that ages ago, thanks very much. The Li sisters grinned at each other. You never know, Tan, said Dayu. We are fairy earthlings, fleet of foot, that's what the old proverb says. Here today, who knows where tomorrow? Take me, for example. I was born a southerner, but here I am living in the north. Xiangyun clapped her hands. Well said. Dai's got you there, Tan. And she's not the only one to have had such an experience. Look at the rest of us. Some of us are northerners, born and bred. Some were born in the south but grew up in the north. And some grew up in the south, and then moved here later. And yet here we all are together. It's our fate, you see. People and places have an affinity. Their karma brings them together. They all nodded at Xiangyun's little discourse, except for Tan Chun, who just smiled. After chatting for a while longer, they got up to go. Dayu walked with them as far as the door, and would have gone out, but they dissuaded her. You've only just started to feel better. If you come out now, you might catch a chill. So she stood in the doorway, said a few parting words, and watched the four of them walk out of the courtyard gate. When they had gone, she went indoors again, and sat down. The birds were returning to their nests, the sun was setting. With Xiangyun's words about the south still ringing in her ears, Dayu drifted into a daydream. If her parents were still alive. If she still lived in the south, that gentle land of spring flowers and autumn moonlight, of limpid waters and luminous hills. How she would love to be there again, to visit the 24 bridges in Yangzhou, and all the famous historical sites of Nanking. In the south she would have plenty of servants of her own to wait on her. She could do and speak as she pleased, sail in painted pleasure boats, and ride in perfumed carriages, watch the fields of red apricot blossom go by, spot the ensigns through the trees. She would be a young lady in her own right, not an outsider, dependent on others for everything. However much the Jiaos did for her, she always felt the need to be on her best behavior. What wrong had she done in a previous incarnation to deserve this lonely existence? Those words written in captivity by the last emperor of southern Tang. Here, all day long, I bathe my face in tears. How well they expressed her own feelings. Her soul seemed transported to some distant region. When Nightingale came in, a single glance sufficed to tell her the cause of Dayu's absence. She had been in the room when Xiangyun was talking, and knew how easily Dayu was upset by the slightest reference to the south. I thought you might feel tired again, miss, she said, after all your visitors and such a lot of talking, so I've just sent Snowgoose to the kitchen for a bowl of ham and cabbage broth, cooked with dried shrimps, dried seaweed and bamboo shoots. Doesn't that sound good? I suppose so. And some congee? Dayu nodded. I'd rather you and Snow Goose made the congee yourselves. Don't have it done in the kitchen. No, Mississippi. You can never be sure how clean things are in the kitchen. We'll cook the congee ourselves. I asked Snow Goose to tell Cook Loo in the kitchen to take special care with the soup. Cook Loo said we were not to worry, she'd see to it personally and prepare it in her own room. Her daughter Fivey is going to keep an eye on it while it simmers. That's not what I meant, replied Dayu. I wasn't complaining that the kitchen was dirty. It's just that I've been imposing on people for so long, and this illness of mine has caused quite enough extra trouble as it is. With all these special orders for soup and congee, I'm afraid I shall make myself unpopular. Her eyes were a telltale red. Oh, miss. You're imagining things, protested Nightingale. You're her old ladyship's own granddaughter, the apple of her eye. A chance to serve you is something people compete for, not grumble about. Dayu nodded thoughtfully. By the way, she asked, is that Fivey you mentioned the one who used to be friendly with Parfumey when she was at Master Bao's place? That's right. Didn't I hear that she might be going into service at Master Bao's herself? Yes, she was. Then she fell ill, and by the time she was better again and ready to start, there was all that trouble over Skybright, and it had to be put off. I've always liked the look of her, said Dayu. Meanwhile a serving woman had arrived with the soup, and Snow Goose went out to fetch it. Cook Loo says to tell Miss Lin this one's been specially cooked in her room by her Fivey, said the old woman, so she won't need to fuss about its not being clean. Snow Goose said she would relay this message, and carried the soup into the room. Dayu, however, had already heard their conversation, and told Snow Goose to go back at once and ask the woman to thank Mrs. Loo on her return. Snow Goose did this, and the old woman went on her way. Snow Goose now laid out Dayu's bowl and chopsticks on the table. Would you like some of that dried turnip slaw we brought with us from the south, miss, if I mix a little sesame oil and vinegar dressing with it? If you like. But don't go to too much trouble. Snow Goose filled her bowl with congee. Dayu ate half and drank a couple of spoonfuls of the soup. She put down her spoon, and the two maids cleared away the things and cleaned the little table, which they then removed and replaced with the one that usually stood there. Dayu rinsed her mouth and washed her hands. Nightingale, have you put some incense on the brazier? I was just going to, miss. You and Snow Goose have some of the soup and congee. They're good and wholesome. I'll see to the incense. The maids went into the outer room to eat. Dayu put some more incense on the brazier and sat down again. She was about to pick up a book to read when her attention was caught by the melancholy soughing of the wind through the trees outside. A long sigh swept from one end of the garden to the other. The metal wind chimes started jangling under the eaves. Snow Goose was the first to finish her soup and came in to see if there was anything Dayu needed. It's turning colder, said Dayu. Have those fur clothes had a proper airing yet, the ones I asked you to take out the other day? Yes, Mississippi. Bring them here, will you? I'd like something warm to put over my shoulders. Snow Goose went out and returned with a bundle of fur-lined clothes, wrapped in a piece of felt. She undid the wrapper and held the clothes out for Dayu to choose from. Dayu noticed among the clothes another smaller bundle wrapped in silk. She reached out a hand to pick it up and untied the wrapper. Inside she found a pair of silk handkerchiefs. She recognized them at once as the ones Baoyu had secretly sent her during his convalescence. There were the verses she had written on them. Even the tear stains could still be seen. And next to them in the little bundle were the perfumed sachet she had embroidered for him, and half demolished in a fit of pique, the torn fan case, and the snipped remains of the silken cord she had made for his magic jade. Nightingale, in sorting out the clothes for airing, must have come across these mementos in one of the chests, and slipped them into this bundle for safety. Dayu seemed to have forgotten Snowgoose and the clothes entirely. She stood with the handkerchiefs in her hands and stared at them as though entranced. As she read the verses, tears began to stream down her cheeks. Nightingale came in, to find Snowgoose standing there dumbly, with the felt-wrapped bundle of clothes still held out in front of her, while spread on the little table at Dayu's side were the sachet, fan case and cord. Dayu was holding 2 faded handkerchiefs with some writing on them, and was gazing at them in tears. As the poet says, tokens of past estrangement catch the lover's eye. Fresh tears fall on tears of days gone by. Nightingale knew only too well the tender memories attached to each one of those objects. She thought that sympathy would have little chance of success as a remedy, and decided instead to administer a cheerful rebuke. Come along now, miss, what's the sense in looking at things like that? They belong to the past. You and Master Bao were children then. Goodness knows how many silly tiffs you had. All smiles 1 minute, crying your hearts out the next. Thank goodness you're both older, and have learned to take life a bit more seriously. You wouldn't dream of spoiling pretty things like these now, would you? She had meant well. But her words only reminded Dayu of the old days with Bao Yu, and released a fresh flood of tears. Nightingale tried again to cheer her up. Come on now, Mississippi Snowgoose is waiting. Please choose something to wear. Dayu let the handkerchiefs drop. Nightingale swiftly retrieved them, wrapped them up again with the sachet and the other things, and put them away. Finally Dayu draped one of the fur-lined jackets over her shoulders and walked listlessly to the outer room. She sat down and looking round saw Bao Chai's poem and letter still lying on the table. She picked them up and reread them a couple of times. The feeling's the same, she said to herself with a sigh, even if our circumstances are different. I should write something in reply. I'll write 4 stanzas and set them to an air for the Qin. Then tomorrow I can make a copy and send it to Chai. She told Snowgoose to bring in her brush and inkstone, which were on the table outside, and moistening the ink, began to write. When she had completed 4 stanzas, she took a Qin handbook from her shelf and looked through it. She decided to make a suite out of the 2 old melodies, Lonely Orchid Pavan and Saintly Virtue. Having done the pointing, she wrote out a copy of the words there, and then to send to Bao Chai, and asked Snowgoose to fetch the 3/4 size Qin she had brought from home, which was stored in a trunk. She tuned the strings and did a few preliminary finger exercises. Her natural aptitude compensated for her lack of practice, and it was not long before all that she had learnt as a child came back to her. After playing for a while, seeing that it was already late in the night, she told Snowgoose to put away the Qin and went to bed. And so we must leave her. One day Bao Yu, after completing his toilet, set off as usual with Tea Leaf to go to school. On their way they encountered Inky, another of his page boys, who came bounding up to them with a broad grin on his face and announced. Good news, Master Bao. The preceptor's not at school today, and you've all been given the day off. Are you being serious? Asked Bao Yu. If you don't believe me, take a look. Isn't that Master Huan and young Master Lon on their way back now? Bao Yu looked and sure enough there were his half-brother and young nephew coming towards him with their contingent of pages, chatting away and giggling, though he could not catch what it was they were saying. When they saw him, they halted and stood with their arms respectfully at their sides. Why have you come back from school so soon? Bao Yu asked them. The preceptor is busy today, replied Huan, and says we can all have the day off. We're to attend as usual tomorrow. Hearing this, Bao Yu turned about and, having reported the news to Grandmother Jia and his father, returned to Green Delights. Why are you back? Asked Aroma. He told her what had happened, and after sitting with her for a minute or two made a move to go out again. Where are you off to in such a hurry? She asked. If you've been given the day off school, that doesn't mean you have to go charging about. You ought to make it a day of rest. Bao Yu stopped in his tracks and hung his head. I know you're right. But when will I next have a chance to get out and have some fun? Be a sport. He said this in such an appealing tone of voice that Aroma relented. All right, she said with a smile. Meanwhile, lunch had been brought in, and he had to stay and eat it. He bolted it down, rinsed his mouth, and was off. Fast as a puff of smoke, he sped to the Naiad's house. He found Nightingale in the courtyard hanging handkerchiefs out to dry. Has Miss Lin had her lunch yet? He asked. She had half a bowl of congee earlier on, replied Nightingale, but wasn't feeling very hungry. She's sleeping at the moment. You'd better go somewhere else just now, Master Bao, and come back a bit later. He left reluctantly, not knowing quite where to go. Suddenly it occurred to him that he had not seen Shichun for several days, and he began strolling in the direction of Smartweed Loggia. When he reached the courtyard and stood by one of the windows, it all seemed very quiet and deserted. She too, he concluded, was having her nap and not to be disturbed. He was about to leave when he heard a faint sound coming from inside, too faint to identify. He stood still and listened again, in the hope of hearing it more clearly. There it was. A distinct little tap. He was still trying to think what it could be, when a voice said, "Why have you made that move and not countered there?" It was a game of Go. But Bao Yu did not have time to recognize the voice of the speaker. He heard Shichun reply, "Why should I bother? If you take me there, I shall simply counter here, and if you take me again I shall take you again. I shall still be one move ahead, and in the end I shall be able to connect." "And what if I take you here?" "Io," exclaimed Shichun. "You had an inside counterattack up your sleeve. I'm defenseless." That other girl's voice was so familiar. But he still couldn't quite place it. It wasn't one of his cousins, he was sure of that. And yet Shichun was unlikely to be entertaining an outsider. Lifting the door curtain very gently aside, he peeped in. The Go partner was none other than the nun from Green Bower Hermitage, the dweller beyond the threshold, Adamantina. He dared not intrude any further. The girls were totally absorbed in their game, and had neither of them noticed that they were being spied upon. Bao Yu continued to stand there and watch. Adamantina leant low over the board and said to Shichun, "Do you want to lose that whole corner?" "Of course not. It's perfectly safe. All those pieces of yours are dead, aren't they?" "Are you sure?" "Go ahead and try." "All right. There's my move. Now let's see what you can do." A smile crossed Adamantina's face. She placed her next piece to link up with one she already had on the edge of the board, and then pounced on one of Shichun's pieces, and annihilated her entire corner. She laughed. "That's called pulling your boots off upside down." Before Shichun had time to reply, their unobserved observer, unable to contain himself any longer, burst out laughing. The two girls were startled out of their wits. "What do you mean by sneaking in here without saying a word?" exclaimed Shichun. "What an ill-mannered way to behave, honestly. How long have you been there?" "I came in just as you started to play for that corner. I had to watch it out." He bowed to Adamantina. "Greetings, Reverend Sister," he said with a smile. "Wherefore this rare excursion from the mystic portals of Zen? What karma brings thee to Maya's dusty realm?" She blushed from ear to ear, said nothing, lowered her head and stared at the Go board. Bao Yu could see that he had embarrassed her, and tried to make up for it. "Seriously," he said, with a charming smile, "how can common mortals compare with those who, like you, have renounced the world? In the first place, you have achieved inner peace. And with that peace comes a deep spirituality. And with that spirituality a clear insight." As he was speaking, Adamantina lifted her eyes a fraction and glanced at him. She looked down again at once, and a deep flush spread slowly across her face. Bao realized that she was deliberately trying to ignore him, and sat down awkwardly beside the table. Shi-chun wanted to continue the game, but after a silence Adamantina said, "Let's play another day." Having said this, she stood up, straightened out her dress, and sat down again. Then, turning to Bao, she asked, in a zany tone of voice, "Where have you come from?" It came as a great relief to Bao that she should speak to him at all, and he was grateful of the chance to remedy his earlier blunder. But then it suddenly struck him that her question might not be as straightforward as it sounded. Was this one of her Zen subtleties? He sat there tongue-tied and red in the face. Adamantina smiled and turned to talk to Shi-chun. Shi-chun smiled too. "Cousin Bao," she said, "what's so hard about that? Haven't you heard the saying, I come from whence I come? To judge by the color of your face anyone would think you were among strangers. Don't be shy." Adamantina seemed to take this banter personally. She experienced a strange stirring of emotion, and her face grew hot. She knew she must be blushing again, and became extremely flustered. Rising to her feet, she said, "I've been here a long time. I think I should be making my way back to the hermitage." Shi-chun knew the peculiarity of Adamantina's temperament, and did not press her to stay. She was showing her out, when Adamantina gave a little laugh and said, "It's so long since I've been to see you, and the way home is so full of twists and turns. I'm afraid of losing my way." "Pray allow me to be your guide," volunteered Bao promptly. "I would be greatly honored," she replied. "Please go ahead, Master Bao." The two of them said goodbye to Shi-chun, and walked out of Smartweed Loggia. Their winding path led them near the Naiad's house, and as they approached they heard strains of music in the air. "That's a cheen," said Adamantina. "Where could it be coming from, I wonder?" "It must be Cousin Lin playing in her room," replied Bao. "Really? Is that another of her accomplishments? I've never heard her mention it." Bao repeated what Dayu had told him. "Shall we go and watch?" he suggested. "You mean listen, I suppose," said Adamantina. "One listens to the cheen. One never watches." "There you are," said Bao with a grin. "I said I was a common sort of mortal." They had now reached a rockery close to the Naiad's house. They sat down and listened in silence, touched by the poignancy of the melody. Then a murmuring voice began to chant. Autumn deepens, and with it the wind's bitter moan. My love is far away. I mourn alone, gazing in vain for a glimpse of home. I stand at my balcony. Tears bedew my gown. After a brief pause, the chant began again. Hills and lakes melt into distant night. Through my casement shines the clear light of the moon and the sleepless Milky Way. My thin robe trembles as wind and dew alight. There was another brief pause. Adamantina said to Bao. The first stanza rhymed on moan, the second on night. I wonder how the next will rhyme. The chant began again from within. Fate denies you freedom, holds you bound, inflicting on me too a heavy wound. In closest harmony, our hearts resound. In contemplation of the ancients, is solace to be found. That must be the end of the third stanza, said Adamantina. How tragic it is. I don't know anything about music, said Bao. But just from the way she sang, I found it terribly sad. There was another pause, and they heard Dayu tuning her cheen. That tonic B-flat of hers is too sharp for the scale, commented Adamantina. The chanting began again. Alas! This particle of dust, the human soul, is only playing out A predetermined role. Why grieve to watch the wheel of karma turn? A moon-like purity remains my constant goal. As she listened, Adamantina turned pale with horror. Just listen to the way she suddenly uses a sharpened fourth there. Her intonation is enough to shatter bronze and stone. It's much too sharp. What do you mean, too sharp? Asked Bao. It will never take the strain. As they were talking, they heard a sudden twang, and the tonic string snapped. Adamantina stood up at once and began to walk away. What's the matter? Asked Bao. You will find out in time. Please don't say anything about this. She walked off, leaving Bao in a state of great confusion. Eventually he too made his way dejectedly home. And there our narrative leaves him. Adamantina arrived back at Greenbower Hermitage to find the old lay sisters waiting for her return. They closed the gate after her and she sat with them for a while, intoning her Zen breviary. They had dinner, and after dinner the incense braziers were replenished. They all bowed before the shrine of the Bodhisattva, and the women went off duty, leaving Adamantina alone. Her couch and backrest were set out for her. Sitting cross-legged, she first regulated her breathing and closed her eyes. Then, cleansed of all wayward thoughts, her mind began to soar towards the realm of higher truth. She sat in meditation until well after midnight, when she was disturbed by a sudden clattering sound on the roof. Afraid there might be burglars about, she rose from her couch and went into the front hall. Looking out, all she could see were long clouds that stretched across the sky, and the moon shining through a watery haze. It was a mild night, and she stayed there for a while, leaning over the balustrade. Suddenly 2 cats started wailing to each other on the roof above her head. The words Bao had spoken to her that afternoon came flashing into her mind. She felt an involuntary racing of the heart, her ears burned. Making a determined effort to compose herself, she went back into her meditation room and sat down again on her couch. Her efforts were in vain. Something was overpowering her. She felt 10,000 horses stampeding through her head. The couch itself seemed to start swaying, and her body seemed to leave the hermitage. She was surrounded by handsome young noblemen, all asking for her hand in marriage. There were matchmakers hustling her towards a bridal carriage against her will. Then the scene changed again. Now she was being kidnapped. A gang of ruffians with swords and clubs was threatening her, mauling her. She started screaming for help. By now the old nuns and lay sisters were wide awake, and had come hurrying into the hall with candles to discover the cause of the disturbance. They found her lying on the ground, with her arms outstretched, frothing at the mouth. She was woken from this apparent coma, only to fix her eyes into a rigid stare and cry out, her cheeks burning a fierce crimson. Buddha is my protector. Don't touch me, you ruffians. The women were too scared to do anything but call out. Wake up. Wake up. We're here now. I want to go home, replied Adamantina. Who'll be my friend and take me home? But this is your home. While the others stayed talking to her, one of the nuns was sent to pray at the shrine of the goddess of mercy. She shook the bamboo box of tallies kept by the altar, and on consulting the relevant passage in the divination book read that the Een spirit of the southwest corner had been offended. Of course, exclaimed one of the others, when she reported back. The southwest corner of the garden was originally uninhabited, so it would be sure to contain a high concentration of Een essence. Some busied themselves making soup, others brought water. One of the nuns, who had come with Adamantina from the south, and was for that reason closer and more devoted to her than the others, sat next to her on the couch and put her arms protectively round her. Adamantina turned her head. Who's that? It's only me. Adamantina looked at her curiously for a minute. Oh, it really is, she cried, and flung her arms round the nun, sobbing hysterically. Oh mother, save me, or I'm going to die. The nun called out to her in an attempt to bring her to her senses, and began to massage her gently. The old women brought in tea, and they sat up together till dawn when finally Adamantina dozed off. The nun sent for the doctor, and several doctors came and took her pulses. There were as many differing diagnoses as there were doctors. Excessive worry damaging the spleen, phlogistic intrusion into the hematic system, offense caused to an evil spirit, a combination of internal and external chill. None of these seemed conclusive. Finally a doctor came whose first question after reading her pulses was, "Did the young lady practice meditation?" The women informed him that it was a regular thing with her. "And did this illness develop quite suddenly last night?" "Yes, it did. Indubitably a case of heat in the cardiac orb affording entrance to a vagrant evil spirit." "Will she be all right?" Luckily the meditation does not seem to have been too far advanced, and the spirit was therefore not able to penetrate too deeply. "She will most probably recover." He wrote out a prescription for the dephlogistication of the cardiac orb, after one dose of which Adamantina began to show signs of improvement. News of her attack soon spread, and it became a subject of gossip for the lads in town. All that chastity and religion was bound to be too much for a girl of her age. Especially such an attractive, lively thing. Sooner or later she'll get soft on some lucky fellow and run away. A few days later Adamantina was slightly better. But her concentration seemed to have gone, and she often found herself drifting off into a dreamlike state. The news did not reach Xueqin for a few days. She was sitting in her room when Landscape came hurrying in. "Miss, have you heard what's happened to Sister Adamantina?" "No, what is it?" "I heard Miss Xing and Mrs. Zhu talking about it yesterday. Remember that day she was here playing Go? Apparently that very night she had a fit. She was talking about bandits trying to carry her away, and all sorts of other strange things. She still hasn't quite recovered. Don't you think it's peculiar?" Xueqin thought silently to herself. So for all her fastidious purity, Addie's worldly karma is still not complete. If only I had been born into a different family. If only I were free to become a nun. I would never be tempted by evil spirits. I know I would be able to subdue every unholy thought and achieve total detachment from the world and all its entanglements. With this thought she experienced a sudden sense of illumination, which she tried to express in the following gatha. Since at first there was no space, things can have no proper place. From void all comes. To void must all return. She told a maid to light some incense, and meditated for a while. Then she took down her Go handbook, and began looking through it, studying the tactics of such famous Go masters of old as Kong Rong and Wang Jixian. There was crab wrapped in lotus leaves, and golden oriole strikes hair, but she found neither of these very impressive, and corner kill in 36 moves she found too hard to understand and harder still to remember. It was dragon chain of 10 galloping horses that really caught her fancy. She was still working it out, when she heard someone come into the courtyard and call out, "Landscape." But to know who this visitor was, you must turn to the next chapter.